None of you got to be backstage in the green room, but I was getting to talk with Dennis Todey earlier. He's the director of the Midwest Climate Hub in Ames, Iowa, and his title of his talk today is Changing Climate and Impacts on Midwest Agriculture. Dennis Todey is the director of the Midwest Climate Hub in Ames. He is a native Iowan with a BS and PhD from Iowa State in Meteorology and Agricultural Meteorology. And he spent 2 stints in South Dakota, first completing his MS at the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, and most recently as associate professor and state climatologist for South Dakota at South Dakota State University. He is well known regionally as a speaker and media source on various climate issues and is the former president of the American Association of Climatologists. Please welcome Dennis Todey. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon. It's right there, yeah.
Good morning. How's everybody doing today? All right. Are we on to the next set of slides then? I always hate that introduction. It always sounds much too formal when I do it that way. But today what we're going to talk about from my standpoint is how the issues with agriculture are being impacted from an agriculture or from a climate perspective. Because climate is clearly a huge player in what is happening in the agricultural sector right now, to be able to deal with those issues and to be able to keep agriculture productive. The changing climate issues are impacting soils, as Finian addressed already, but those also changing issues and variable issues are causing much more difficulty in being able to do our agricultural practices. When we're talking about agricultural issues and climate, we deal with what's happening in the Midwest primarily. Different areas, different issues when we get in different parts of the country. But I divide these things into what we call primary issues and secondary issues. Primary issues are what is happening and changing issues in the way of climate. And there are a couple drivers right now. When you talk with producers and when you go out and deal with the issues going on right now, probably the biggest issue is not necessarily the warming. There are issues related to warming, but the biggest issue right now is precipitation. Changes in precipitation by time of year, by timing, and amounts of rainfall. We saw this in spades last year. How many people that are producers had a growing season that they would like last year? Let me see you raise your hands. When I go out and do these talks, there were great struggles last year. The flooding captured a lot of attention regionally and nationally, but from a larger agricultural perspective, probably the widespread wetness was the larger issue. And we're seeing this on a regular basis, where we have changes in the amount of rainfall by time of year, changes in our seasonality of our rainfall, meaning that we're getting more rainfall in our spring and our falls. Those are the 2 times when producers are out trying to do agricultural production in fields, and when you're putting more water on at those times of year, that's creating major issues for them. I fear that we did a large amount of soil damage last year for people trying to get producers trying to get into fields to get crops in, and then trying to get crops out at the end of the day or at the end of the season. So there was a great amount of soil damage done because of the heavy rainfall events. Also, our rainfall events have tending to be larger or bigger rainfall events. From a soil standpoint, really there's not much of anything good that can happen with a 3, 4, 5 inch or larger rainfall event. So when we're dealing with this change in precipitation that is greatly impacting our agricultural production systems, it's also impacting our soils because of the chance for soil loss. Also from a water quality standpoint, because if heavy rainfalls at different times of year change our nutrient management and nutrient losses because of those heavy rainfall events and where we're going on. As you can see clearly, 6 times in the last 25 years, Iowa has had spring rainfalls below the long-term average. So we're getting above our long-term average on a much more regular basis. And that slows down the ability to get in and do production. It also does our long-term soil damage because of that. Now, from a warming standpoint, we are getting warmer. And that has some benefits to that we're able to take advantage of. Sometimes there's a longer growing season. Last year, the bit of warming we've had and an extension of our growing season with the first spring freeze being tending to be earlier and our first fall freeze. That picture is really iconic of last year. For those of you who may not be able to see it very well, it's center pivot irrigation standing in the middle of water. This is from Indiana, and that was really what we saw a huge amount of last year. Water, too much of it, in too many different places. So it's kind of tiny here, but you can see this is from the last National Climate Assessment. What I was addressing here, the top image on that is how much precipitation has changed since the beginning of the 20th century. The greener it is, the more increase in precipitation, and the top number is annually. So the darkest green is increases of over 15%. In precipitation. So what that shows you is here in Iowa and all around the upper Midwest, we've seen increases in precipitation, sometimes large increases in precipitation. And the standard of rain makes grain doesn't always apply when you have too much rainfall related to that. And then the bottom ones just break that down by time of year. Lots of green in the spring and lots of green in the fall also. And those are the two times of the year we really don't want as much precipitation related to that. Here's the graphic I was referring to, a little bit tiny, but each one of those dots, that shows Iowa in the spring for 1895 until the present. So a lot of variability around that, but the blue line shows you the overall trend, and the box on the right side shows you that's only 6 of the last 25 years have we been below the long-term average, and we've had more frequently bigger rainfalls with bigger losses. Our falls, not quite as much, but other places in the region, we've seen bigger fall precipitation. Issues related to this. Really the point we want to hit home about soils. Bigger rainfalls, especially in the off-season, and when soils are not managed appropriately, you have greater chances for losing soils because of soil loss, because of nitrogen loss, and compaction, a multiple set of issues. And that is why water management has become a much bigger issue and will continue to be as we go along in the future for managed soils. We are getting warmer, but we're getting warmer in kind of a little bit different ways. We think of warm when we think those hot summer days as the really warm summer days as increased heat then. At this point, we're not seeing that. Actually, our summers are getting a little bit cooler in the high temperatures, but our low temperatures are what are increasing. We're seeing a lot more warming in the winter overall, and we've seen a large amount of this winter. But this breaks down the difference between the high and low temperatures. The upper left-hand side is what is happening in Iowa in the way of high temperatures. Bottom right-hand side is what's happening with overnight low temperatures. So we don't get as hot during the daytime in the summer as much as we used to, not as much into those extremes, but we're seeing more frequent warm nights, which has a whole different set of issues and connotations related to it. This seems to be related to increasing amount of moisture in the atmosphere. We're more humid than we have been. And that leads to those warmer nights, and warmer nights are more stressful for livestock, especially livestock that are outside of confinement. It changes our disease potential. When we have more moisture around, we're wetter, there's a greater chance for disease issues on a wide variety of crops. And when we're talking about changing climate issues and crops, the issues are expansive. We'll talk more about that here in just a second. This is a graphic for Des Moines, again indicating what is happening in the way of summertime dew points. The dew point is a measure of how much moisture is in the air, more humid conditions on a more regular basis. What that's doing from a crop perspective is really very interesting because it is changing where we're able to grow our crops. We've seen expansions in the top one, our soybeans and corn, where we're growing soybeans and corn. The changes in temperature and precipitation, along with changes in varieties, have expanded where we're growing corn and soybeans into the northern plains. The situation there, we're pushing out some small grains because of replacing that, but that's also leading to the additional rainfall up there has made that a viable crop where it typically was not a viable crop otherwise. Mentioned already the increased minimum temperatures, growing season length. So while growing season length can be a good thing for a longer variety of crop and getting better yield, you also have some other issues. You have changing insect issues. The longer time for crop growth is also a time for more insects to grow go from 1 life cycle to 2 life cycles to 3 life cycles in a year. Also, those warm winter temperatures allow some insects to overwinter, either further north or more locally than they did before. So these are all issues that are impacting our overall ability to do crops, leading to some possible invasives. This is the brown marmorated stink bug, some work a postdoc fellow with us has worked with, not an agricultural perspective, but has done lots of damage to apple orchards in the Northeast. This is one example of an invasive that may be more as we go along here. Another issue, as we get into these are what we call the secondary impacts, the potential for carbon dioxide, even without climate changes, for carbon dioxide to change weeds. There are a number of weeds, unfortunately, that like carbon dioxide and do a lot better. This is Canada thistle in a well-known USDA study. That on the left is what is under current herbicide rates and current CO2 conditions. On the right is doubled CO2 conditions. That there are some weeds that increase CO2 we're not going to be able to control them as well. Kudzu in the south is another one that we really are concerned about. So kind of the things we talked about: increased precipitation, changes in soil, disease issues, and overall warmer, especially in winter. But we also have these secondary issues: soils, changing weed insect issues, and then some effects on perennials. With some of these changing seasonal issues, tree fruits and some of those perennial issues are having problems with those, breaking dormancy earlier before the last spring freeze. That's current. What's coming in the future? Well, more issues related to this. We expect in the future that change in precipitation to continue, where we have more rain earlier in the year and dry later on. So it increases our need that we have to maintain and take care of our soils. It's the first thing we can do in the line of dealing with climate change, is making sure we're taking care of our soils. So thanks for having me here. Everybody have a good day.